Eurozone inflation exceeds ECB's target. Slovakia wants to normalize its relations with Moscow. And Brazil requests to join the IEA. I'm Salma El-Feki and welcome to the Economic Bulletin. And we start off with Europe, where the Eurozone inflation rose to a 2.1% in August, marking the first time it has exceeded the European Central Bank's 2% target since April. The flash estimate surpassed the 2% forecast by economists. The increase was primarily driven by higher prices for food, alcohol and tobacco, which rose by 3.2% year over year. While core inflation held steady, the unexpected uptick in the headline figure has led analysts to believe that the central bank is unlikely to cut interest rates in December. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has stated that he wants to accelerate his government's plan to stop housing asylum seekers in hotels, a policy costing the UK a significant amount of money. The government had previously pledged to end the practice by the end of parliamentary term in 2029. The move comes amid growing public concern and significant economic pressure. The cost of operating the UK's asylum system reached a £5.4 billion in the last fiscal year, largely due to the use of hotels. As of mid-2025, over 32,000 asylum seekers were housed in hotels, with the government spending around £170 per night per person for accommodation.
I'd like to bring that forward. I think it's a good challenge. I want to bring that forward. And part of the change in the phasing.
Britain's long-term borrowing costs have surged to their highest level since 1998, with the yield on 30-year government bonds rising to a 5.697% on Tuesday. This sell-off in bonds, coupled with a drop in the pound, signals growing investor anxiety over the UK's ability to manage its finances. Analysts cite heavy government borrowing and slow economic growth as the main drivers behind the market's concerns. The government is facing pressure to address the fiscal situation and is also being urged to halt its quantitative tightening policy to help stabilize the bond market. And for further analysis, we are joined from Paris by the director of the EU-ASEAN Centre, Mr. Meher Nicholas Ferdsley. Welcome to Qnews, sir, and to Economic Bulletin. Let me ask you, how does the government's pledge to accelerate the closure of the migrant hotels fit into this broader fiscal strategy?
I'm delighted to join you today. So it's a cool irony because you have many things happening at the same time.
Yep.
Coincidentally, it is quote unquote a coincidence that the borrowing cost, so the price the UK government has to pay when it's borrowing money, when it's selling bonds, UK gilts, is the highest in nearly 30 years. Now, that's a terrible level. It's a symbolic level. It's not good for the economy. It's happening at the wrong time for the UK government. And there's another, for the optics, not bad optics. According to some estimates, there are a dozen newly minted British billionaires who became billionaires in the past 10 years. And how did these new British billionaires emerge? Not by creating any advanced technological, good or service, simply by selling hotel rooms to the UK government. So that's really terrible. It says a lot that the UK bureaucracy wasn't, well organized enough to rent or a bunch of hotel rooms for illegal migrants or asylum seekers, they had to rely for 10 years on middlemen, on businessmen who would go to Hilton, Sheraton, local hotel chains like Travelodge in the UK, and
Yep.
they would buy hotel rooms on sale and they would resell the rooms to the government and taking a 50, 70, 100% profit margin on the back of UK taxpayers. So that also is very bad. So all that happening at the same time,
Yes.
the government, making budget cuts, telling the people that they have to accept lower pensions and lower hospital, services.
Yes. Do you think, Mr. Fursley, this is a viable way to achieve significant cost savings? And what are the potential alternative costs of this approach, do you think? We seem to have lost Mr. Fursley, so we are back to our news. And still in Europe, Statistics Austria has revealed that the country's inflation rate rose to a 4.1% in August. This marks a notable increase, with the energy sector experiencing a particularly strong jump of 5.9%. The primary factors driving this inflation were the services sector, which saw a 4.7% price increase, and the food group, which rose by 5.0%. Core inflation, which excludes the more volatile categories of energy and food, was at 3.8% for the month. Additionally, the EU-wide comparable harmonized consumer price index, the HCPI, for Austria was also at a 4.1% in August. And moving to Asia, where the Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, urging member states to strengthen the bloc's role in a world facing challenges and changes. He presented a 5-point proposal focused on deepening cooperation, upholding multilateralism, and opposing the Cold War mentality. The summit issued the Tianjin Declaration, which condemns terrorism and calls for a more just, equal, and representative multipolar world order. The summit underscored the increasing importance of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a platform for non-Western nations to align on geopolitical and economic issues. The Bank of Japan Deputy Governor Ryozo Himino has stated that the central bank should keep raising interest rates, but warned that global economic uncertainty remains high, suggesting it was in no rush to push up still low borrowing costs. Himino added that there were both upside and downside risks to the inflation outlook. Himino noted that while Japan's tight labor market may push up wages, slowing global growth and the hit to Japan's economy from higher U.S. levies could weigh on prices. In Oceania, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has reported that international trade added only slightly to economic growth in the second quarter, and government spending made no contribution at all, leading some analysts to lower their growth forecasts. Data showed that the current account ran a deficit of 13.7 billion Australian dollars in the June quarter from a revised 14.1 billion Australian dollars the previous quarter. It further noted that exports would add an 0.1 percentage points to gross domestic product in the second quarter, when analysts had expected a flat contribution. And we are back again to Mr. Meher Nicholas Furtzley, the director of the EU ASEAN Centre. We were disconnected, sir. Let me continue and ask you my third question, which is, given that the cost of the asylum system reached £5.4 billion last year, how much of this cost do you think is directly attributable to the hotel policy versus other parts of the system, such as maybe processing backlogs and legal fees?
It's a big mess. So the cost structure is highly inefficient, probably the most inefficient in Europe, if not the world. Part of it is attributable to the mismanagement of hotel rooms. You know, we talked about these billionaires, really, who made a fortune in the past 9-10 years simply buying blocks of hotel rooms wholesale from Hilton, Sheraton, Holiday Inn, and reselling them with a 100 or 200% profit margin to the government of Britain. So I would say probably 35% can be attributed to the mismanagement and the high price of the hotel rooms.
Okay.
The rest is really bureaucratic mismanagement, but I think there's a bigger issue here. The notion of family reunion, right? That is a very expensive notion. You know, once again, based on 1970s French law, copied by Northern European, including British lawmakers. And so the idea is now, if you are an asylum seeker or even an illegal immigrant living in a hotel, all expenses paid in Britain, you can, quote, import your wife and children and grandparents and parents from Mali or Sudan or Peru. And that is a spiraling, it's an open-ended cost, right? When you have that right, and when the right is enshrined in law, and then poor Keir Starmer, he's a human rights lawyer by tradition. So most of his career, he was a human rights lawyer and judge. So he was a believer in that notion of family reunion for poor, disenfranchised immigrant. And now he has, as a prime minister, to completely backpedal and do the opposite of what he preached for the previous 20 years.
Mr. Furtzley, what is the fiscal and economic argument, do you think, for or against spending the £170 per night per asylum seeker, considering both direct costs and the social or economic impact of not providing this accommodation?
So here, in economics and finance, it's all about arbitrage, right? So what if we do this?
Yes.
What if we don't do that? Yeah. And so here there's an arbitrage because of the pressure from, the elephant in the room, right? The public opinion. Nigel Farage, his party, was a small right-wing populist party. And now, according to the latest opinion poll, that right-wing party called Reform UK, 35-40% of British voters, including working class British voters, are tempted to vote for Nigel Farage. So this is the main arbitrage, right? This is why the government is panicking, because there is a 50 billion hole in the UK budget. And so they need, between now and the end of the year, to find, to plug the hole. How do you plug the 50 billion pounds hole? You either raise taxes one way or another, or you decrease social benefits. So you have less beds in public NHS hospitals, less pensions. And so now the government is asking a big sacrifice from their own voters, working class, poor voters. And at the same time, they're spending tens of millions of pounds every week for asylum seekers and their families. Yeah. So the optics is bad. It's, in relative terms, it's not absolute, because Britain is a very, very rich country. So the problem, the fiscal, economic problem, is not in absolute terms, it's in relative terms. Because at the moment where you want to spend more money on asylum seekers and their families, you're asking the UK working class to make a lot of sacrifices. And when they go to school, when they go to the public NHS hospitals, there is a queue. Why is there a queue? In part because there are foreigners, blah, 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 waiting in line. So all that put together is putting pressure on the government.
Yes. With the UK long-term borrowing costs at their highest since 1998, what do you think specific actions or policies is the government, do you think, considering to restore investor confidence and demonstrate fiscal control?
So here, it's not only their fault, it's partly their fault because they have been in power for 13 months, a little more than a year. So they're paying a high price for the mistakes they made in the past 13 months. But also, it's because of the previous conservative governments who left a very mediocre or bad situation 13 months ago when Labour came to power. So it's, compounding the mistakes of the others. They made mistakes of their own, right? And the biggest mistake is the following, is not being able to control government spending. So the idea is, that, with Trump, right? With Trump, with the accelerating, Cold War with China, all that put together, the disruption to world trade and commerce, you need, as a government, to be extremely lean and mean and efficient. You can't afford to be an amateur, right? And so, investors, they have the feeling that in spite of their talk about, free market economics and making Britain business friendly, the policies of the government in the past year haven't been very amicable to business. They're raising taxes directly or indirectly. They're spending a lot of money, and the money is not spent efficiently. The NHS, the big burgeoning public hospital system in Britain, is the most inefficient in the world. I think the ratio is they have one doctor and 2 nurses for 15 bureaucrats. So that's a crazy ratio, and it's not sustainable, to be honest.
Well, from Paris, that was the director of the EU ASEAN Centre, Mr. Meher Nicholas Ferdsley. Thank you so much, sir, for your insights today. Gen Z's new obsession is fueling rapid growth in the food industry, with the global matcha market set to nearly double. Strong demand and soaring sales are making this vibrant green trend a powerful source in wellness and food sectors.
Green is the new glow up. The global matcha market is crushing it at over $5.5 billion in 2025, fueling a 7.2% annual growth that's blending tradition with trend setting. From Asian Japanese tea to a viral superfood, matcha's antioxidant-packed, energy-boosting magic is stealing Gen Z and millennials' hearts. Valued today at $3.37 billion and set to double to $6.7 billion by 2035, matcha's creativity is in full blast, powering everything from creamy lattes and sparkly frappuccinos to baked goods and ready-to-drink refresheners. Japan keeps its crown on the quality champ, but North America is the place where matcha mania is zooming fastest. And listen up, searches for matcha powder shot up, doubling between January and August 2025. While supply chain hurdles and sustainability vibes challenge the scene, innovation and conscious sourcing are keeping this green wave unstoppable. So are you sipping smart and staying woke?
Thank you, Rana. And now we move to the latest developments in the United States. The U.S. manufacturing sector contracted for the 6th consecutive month in August, even as an artificial intelligence AI spending boom provides support to some parts of the industry. The Institute for Supply Management's manufacturing PMI registered a 48.7, a slight improvement from July's 48.0, but still below the 50-point threshold that indicates manufacturing expansion. The data fell short of the 49.0 reading that economists had forecast. The fall initial public offering season has begun with a wave of companies from the crypto to consumer sectors launching roadshows this week. This signals a return of investor confidence after a period of anxiety over new U.S. tariffs. The fall window, which runs through mid-October, is a key time for new deals. Analysts believe that strong U.S. stock markets, hovering near record highs, are supporting new offerings. Experts expected that digital asset and AI-related companies will lead the initial public offering market this season, with some predicting that a more sustained wave of listings could begin in 2026. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has stated that Trump administration is continuing its talks with trading partners despite a U.S. appeals court ruling that most of the President Donald Trump's tariffs are illegal. However, Greer did not mention which countries the United States was still in talks with.
Discussion, and so we'll brief the President on the outcome of this, and we'll see if there are any, we have further technical discussions that are happening.
Reuters has reported that Syria has made its first official crude oil export in 14 years, with a tanker carrying 600,000 barrels of heavy crude departing from the port of Tartus. A Syrian energy official revealed that the shipment was part of a deal with a trading firm and marks a significant milestone for a country whose oil sector was devastated by a nearly 14-year war. The export comes after the ousting of the previous government and the lifting of the U.S. sanctions in June. Israeli media has reported a massive increase in financial fraud within the country's banking sector, posing a growing threat to the financial system and eroding customer trust. The Israeli economic newspaper Globes published details of a new directive from the Banking Supervision Department of the Bank of Israel. The order mandates that all banks establish 24/7 telephone assistance centers dedicated to combating financial fraud. Under the directive, banks must be permanently available to their customers and provide an immediate response from a qualified specialist upon the suspicion of a fraudulent activity or misuse of payment services. Bloomberg has reported that OpenAI is seeking local partners to build a large-scale data center in India with at least 1 gigawatt capacity. The move is part of the company's broader Stargate A1 infrastructure initiative. The A1 firm, which recently registered in India and is opening a New Delhi office, has not publicly confirmed the report. CEO Sam Altman may announce the project during an expected visit in September. The plan follows a previously announced $500 billion Stargate investment involving OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle. Prime Minister Robert Fico has stated that Slovakia wants to normalize its relations with Moscow and is increasing imports of Russian gas through the Turk Stream pipeline. Fico also thanked Putin for the safe and regular gas supplies that the country receives through Turk Stream. He said Slovakia, which also is interested in Russian companies potentially participating in a new nuclear power plant. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, has announced that Brazil has submitted a formal request to join the organization as a member country. The agency noted that they received a letter at its Paris headquarters from Brazilian government ministers requesting that Brazil be able to start the process of accession to the IEA. IEA Executive Director Fatih Birol highlighted that Brazil is a cornerstone of the current global energy system and its significance will only grow in the coming years. He added that the agency looked forward to discussing the next steps with both Brazil and its member governments. And we move now to New York, where Egypt's representative Ambassador Osama Abdel Khalek has delivered a speech at the UN General Assembly.
Honorable President, distinguished representatives, allow me at the outset to extend my warmest congratulations to Germany, our esteemed chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, for the excellent leadership demonstrated throughout its tenure in 2025. Full appreciation as well to the former chair, Brazil, for an excellent job chairing us in the PBC the previous session. Both countries' dedication have played a pivotal role in enhancing the Commission's efforts, especially with regard to its bridging, convening and advisory roles with an aim to strengthening the PBC's impact. During the 18th session, the PBC has made good strides in advancing its activities through the collective efforts by member states, regional organizations, and international financial institutions. We have navigated some complex conflicts and post-conflict situations with the aim of establishing enduring peace, bearing in mind the cardinal principle of national ownership and the imperativeness of respecting the unique cultural, social, and political specificities of societies. Egypt has always been a great advocate for the peace building, both in the UN and the African Union. His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Honorable President of Egypt, is the leader of peace building in the African Union, and Cairo hosts the African Union Center for post-conflict reconstruction and development. We're almost like a permanent member in the peace building, so we're genuine believers and doers and actors. Being distinguished colleagues, in the middle of the ongoing 2025 comprehensive review of the peace building architecture, known as PBAR, and as one of the two co-facilitators, our collective conscience is fully drawn, myself and my distinguished colleague, Ambassador Samuel, the distinguished PR of Slovenia, is fully drawn towards refining our methodologies, modalities, and reinforcing our commitment in alignment with the ambitions set forth by the new Agenda for Peace and the Pact for the Future, in addition to the need to elevate the effectiveness of the Peace-Building Commission, capitalizing on the great efforts that were exerted during its previous sessions. In this regard, Egypt believes that we should first encompass a more comprehensive understanding of peace that goes beyond traditional frameworks to embed conflict prevention and address the root causes of conflict. In this context, implementing an all-inclusive peace-building strategy that respects national ownership requires capacity building for local actors, local stakeholders, local institutions. Second, it is imperative that we recognize the milestone decision of the General Assembly in allocating $50 million in assessed funding for the Peace Building Fund. As a major milestone in conflict prevention, However, we should strive to build upon this breakthrough by broadening the resource pool and base and mobilizing additional avenues of support, all kinds of support, in-kind support and financial support. Third, the current international challenges should drive focusing our collective attention toward strengthening multilateralism, especially through deeper UN cooperation with regional and sub-regional organizations, financial institutions, the private sector, and this is the core of Chapter 8 of the UN, as we all know it. Fourth, to improve the work of the PBC, it is also crucial to incorporate a more inclusive approach to peace building. This involves scaling up efforts to engage more with women, youth, and local communities in all stages of peace processes and efforts. Fifth, the intertwined linkages and nexus between peace building and peacekeeping is integral to the broader spectrum of conflict resolution and sustainable peace efforts. Coming year, we're doing the peacekeeping review, and you see there is a lot of complementarity between the PBAR and the efforts we're trying and reviving the peace building approach in the UN and apparatus and so on, and the job fulfilled and being done by the peacekeepers on the ground. In advancing all these objectives, significant emphasis needs to be placed on strategy coherence, funding mechanisms, and strengthening the PBC's cooperation with both the Security Council and the General Assembly, as well as exploring more avenues to do the same with the ECOSOC. And I believe a lot of previous speakers had alluded to that, Honorable President. Finally, as we look ahead, let the combined foresight from the new Agenda for Peace and the Pact for the Future, in addition to the next outcome of the 2025 Peacebuilding Review, serve as a guiding, solid foundation for the Peacebuilding Commission's endeavors. Let us fortify our resolve, refine our tools, rejuvenate our partnerships to not only navigate through the complex trends of contemporary peace-building challenges, but also lead the way into an era defined by enduring peace and full human security. I do thank you, Honorable President, distinguished colleagues.
And that was Egypt's representative at the UN, Ambassador Osama Abdel Khali, at the UN General Assembly. And that brings us to the end of our economic bulletin, and here's what we've been covering. Eurozone inflation exceeds ECB's target. Slovakia wants to normalize its relations with Moscow. And Brazil requests to join the IEA. And this concludes our economic bulletin. And don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EG to stay informed. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.